It was a Thursday evening, the kind of night where everything feels annoyingly normal. The dinner table had the usual quiet hum of clinking cutlery and polite conversation. My wife, Emma, was scrolling on her phone while absently stirring her soup, and my 8-year-old son, Liam, was regaling us with stories about his latest playground adventure. And then, like some cosmic joke, her phone buzzed. Normally, I wouldn't even notice, but her reaction, it was like she'd been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. She snatched the phone, her face turning the color of overcooked pasta. "What's that about?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Oh, work stuff," she said, waving it off a little too quickly. Her fingers moved with frantic precision, typing out a reply. It gnawed at me. You know that gut feeling, the one that wraps around your spine and whispers, "Something isn't right?" Yeah, that. Later that night, when she was asleep, I did something I'd never done in our 12 years together. I checked her phone. It was all there. The messages, the photos, a whole relationship in Technicolor, happening right under my nose. Her late-night work calls and sudden interest in yoga classes were with someone else. I didn't confront her. Not right away. What do you even say in a moment like that? Instead, I packed a bag, left a note that said simply, "I know," and walked out. No yelling, no drama, just silence. At that moment, I thought leaving would be the hardest part. I was wrong. The hardest part would come 5 years later, with a knock at my door. The years after I left were a blur. I moved to a small town 3 states over, got a job doing accounting for a local business, and kept my head down. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet. No betrayals, no chaos, no reminders of Emma. I told myself I was starting over, though some nights I wondered if I was just hiding. I didn't keep in touch with anyone. Not Emma, not Liam. Walking away from my son had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. He wasn't to blame for any of it, but staying meant exposing myself to her lies every single day. I hoped he'd understand one day. 5 years passed without a word. Then, one humid summer afternoon, someone knocked on my door. I opened it, and there he was, Liam, standing taller than I remembered, his face a blend of teenage rebellion and pure contempt. Hi, I managed to say, thrown completely off balance. "Don't hi me," he snapped, stepping inside like he owned the place. He dropped his backpack on the floor with a loud thud, his eyes drilling into me. 5 years, and you just vanish? Who does that? Save it. He cut me off, waving his hand in the air like he was shooing away a fly. "Mom's sick. Like, really sick. Terminal." My stomach sank. "And now I have to come here, like some beggar, to ask you for help," he continued, his voice cracking with anger. "She needs treatment. I need money for college. You can't just walk away from your responsibilities." I stared at him, my mind racing. Responsibility? Was it my responsibility to clean up the mess Emma had made? To pay for a life I'd been cut out of? Still, I said nothing, just turned and walked to my desk, where a folder sat, untouched for years. I grabbed it, my fingers trembling, and came back to where Liam stood, glaring at me. "What's that?" he demanded. I handed it to him without a word. He opened it, his frown deepening as he flipped through the pages. His face went pale as he read the words that had haunted me since the day I left. "All questions," I said, my voice cold and steady, "go to your mom and your real dad." Liam stared at the DNA test results like they were written in a foreign language. He blinked, his mouth opening and closing as if he wanted to say something, but the words refused to come. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. What is this?" he finally stammered, his voice trembling now. "You're a smart kid," I said, leaning against the wall. "I think you can figure it out." His eyes darted over the papers again, desperate for some loophole, some reassurance that this was all just a bad joke. But there wasn't one. The truth was right there in black and white. "You're lying," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Lying?" I let out a bitter laugh. "I wish I were." He shook his head, the anger from earlier flaring back to life. "No, Mom wouldn't. She couldn't. Look, I didn't believe it at first either. I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. But the math didn't add up, and neither did the biology. So, I had the test done before I left. Turns out, I was right. Liam's hands clenched into fists, the papers crumpling under his grip. His eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you? I don't know. Fight for me or something? I thought about it, I admitted. But what was I supposed to do? Drag you through a custody battle just to prove you weren't mine? You were 8. You didn't deserve that kind of confusion. I figured, if I stayed out of the way, at least you'd have one stable parent. He flinched at that. So, what? You just bailed? Like I didn't matter? You mattered, I said quietly, my chest tightening. You still matter. But you need to understand, I didn't leave you. I left the lies, the betrayal, the life that wasn't real. And now you're old enough to know the truth. His face twisted in anguish, the weight of my words hitting him like a ton of bricks. Who is he? He whispered. You'd have to ask your mom, I replied, folding my arms. That's her secret to share, not mine. For the first time, Liam didn't have a snarky comeback or a fiery retort. He just stood there, staring at the crumpled papers in his hands, as if they held all the answers and none at the same time. Liam's silence didn't last long. It rarely did. His chest heaved as he tried to process everything, the anger bubbling back to the surface like lava ready to erupt. So that's it, he spat, his voice rising. You find out I'm not yours, and you just disappear? Like I'm some problem you can walk away from? My heart ached at his words, but I kept my face neutral. It wasn't like that. Then explain it to me, Dad. He emphasized the word like it was a knife, twisting it with venom. Explain how you looked at an 8-year-old kid who thought the world of you and decided, nope, not my responsibility. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. I didn't leave because of you. I left because I couldn't stay in a house built on lies. You think it was easy for me? Walking away from you was the hardest thing I've ever done. Yeah, well, good for you, he sneered, his eyes blazing. Must be nice to run away and start over while Mom and I were left to pick up the pieces. Pick up the pieces? I repeated, the words stinging. Liam, I was the one betrayed here. Your mom cheated, lied, and let me believe you were my son for years. She didn't just break my heart. She blew up my entire life. And what about me? He shot back, his voice cracking. What about my life? You didn't even think about what leaving would do to me. I thought about it every single day, I said, my voice steady but laced with pain. But staying would have meant pretending everything was fine. Pretending that I didn't know. Is that what you wanted? A lie for a father? He flinched at that, his anger flickering into something more vulnerable. You were my dad, he said softly. You still are. Or at least, you were supposed to be. The weight of his words hung in the air, crushing me. I wanted to reach out to him, to tell him I was sorry for everything, for leaving, for not being there when he needed me. But the truth was, I didn't know if I had the right to. Look, I said, trying to find the right words. I'm not saying I handled it perfectly. I made mistakes. But I didn't walk away from you because I didn't care. I walked away because I thought it was the only way to survive. Liam didn't respond. He just turned away, pacing the room like a caged animal, the papers still clutched in his hands. When he finally stopped, he looked at me with eyes full of hurt and confusion. So now what? He asked quietly. I didn't have an answer. Not yet. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of my past decisions pressing down on me like a mountain. Liam's question hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to offer a solution to the chaos I'd created. Or at least the chaos I'd walked away from. So now what? He repeated, his voice sharper. What am I supposed to do with this, huh? Just go home and pretend like everything's fine? Pretend I didn't find out my whole life is one big lie? I don't have all the answers, Liam, I admitted, my voice softer now. But if you want to talk, I'm here. If you need to yell, I can take it. But you have to stop acting like I'm the only one who let you down. His jaw tightened, his hands trembling at his sides. Oh, So now this is my fault? I didn't say that, I replied calmly. But your mom, she's the one who lied to both of us. She's the one who knew the truth and chose to hide it. And whatever mistakes I made them because of her betrayal. She's dying, he shot back, his voice breaking. Do you even care? Or are you so busy playing the victim that you can't see what this is doing to her? To me? The words stung, but I couldn't let him sidestep the truth. I'm sorry she's sick, Liam. I really am. But her illness doesn't erase what she did. It doesn't make her choices any less wrong. Liam threw his hands up in frustration, pacing the room again. You don't get it, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Then help me get it, I said, my voice firm. You came all this way, knocked on my door, and demanded answers. Now I'm giving them to you, and you don't want to hear them. So, tell me, what do you want from me? His steps faltered, and he turned to face me, his eyes glassy but still defiant. I want my dad back, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a sucker punch. I can't undo what happened, I said, taking a step closer to him. And I can't pretend I didn't find out the truth. But if you need me, I'm here. I don't know if I'm still the dad you remember, but I'm willing to try. Liam didn't respond right away. He just stared at me, his expression a mix of anger, hurt, and something else I couldn't quite place. You say that now, he finally said, his voice bitter. But where were you when she needed you? When I needed you? If you cared so much, why didn't you fight for me? For us? I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his accusations. Because I was scared, I admitted, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. I was scared of staying and being a reminder of her lies. Scared of ruining your life more than I already had. I thought, maybe if I stayed away, it would be easier for everyone. Well, it wasn't, he snapped. His words sliced through me, but this time, I didn't flinch. I just nodded. I know, I said quietly, and I'm sorry. For a moment, we stood there in silence, two people bound by a shared pain neither of us knew how to untangle. And as much as I wanted to fix everything, I knew this was just the beginning of the storm. Liam slumped onto the old couch in my tiny living room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. He looked so lost, so much like the little boy I used to know, that it was hard to keep my distance. But I knew better than to rush in. He wasn't ready for comfort. Not yet. So what do I do now? He muttered, staring at the DNA results still crumpled in his hands. I wish I had a simple answer, I said, sitting down in the chair across from him. But you've got to decide how you want to deal with this. Do you talk to your mom? Confront the other guy? Or do you need time to process everything? Liam scoffed, shaking his head. Process what? That my mom's a liar? That my dad? He stopped himself, glancing at me, unsure what to call me anymore. You can still call me Dad, I said gently, if you want. He looked away, his jaw tightening. You don't get it. It's not just about what she did. It's about everything. All the memories, all the times I thought we were a normal family. It's like none of it was real. It was real, I said, leaning forward. At least for me. Every time I took you to the park, every bedtime story, every time I told you I loved you, it was real, Liam. You were my son, and nothing about that was a lie. His eyes darted to me, flickering with something softer, but it vanished just as quickly. Yeah, well, it sure feels like a lie now. I let the silence sit between us, letting him wrestle with his thoughts. After a while, he spoke again, his voice quieter. She didn't tell me anything, he said, almost to himself. She just kept going like everything was normal. Even after you left, she never explained why. She said you abandoned us, that you didn't care. The words hit like a blow, but I kept my expression calm. I figured she'd say something like that, I admitted. It's easier to make me the bad guy than to face what she did. Liam's hands balled into fists again. She let me hate you for years. And now I find out you had a reason to leave? That she's the one who lied to me? How am I supposed to forgive that? I shook my head slowly. You don't have to forgive her. Not right away. Maybe not ever. But you've got to decide if you want answers from her. or if you're ready to leave it in the past. His eyes narrowed. What would you do? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. If it were me, I'd demand the truth. Even if it hurts, even if it's messy. At least then you'll know where you stand. Liam nodded slowly, his expression hardening with determination. Fine, then that's what I'll do. He stood abruptly, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. I'm going back. I'm going to make her tell me everything. I rose too, unsure if I should stop him or encourage him. Liam, wait. No. He cut me off, his voice sharp. I don't need any more advice. I need answers. From her. And with that, he stormed out the door, leaving me alone with the deafening silence of everything unsaid. The door slammed shut, leaving me staring at the spot where Liam had stood. My living room, already small and sparse, suddenly felt suffocating. I wanted to chase after him, to stop him from walking into the emotional minefield he was about to face. But I knew better. This wasn't my battle. Still, the guilt gnawed at me. Had I done the right thing by telling him the truth? Or had I just handed him a burden he wasn't ready to carry? I sank into the couch, rubbing my temples. For years, I justified my decision to leave as the only way to preserve my sanity. But now, seeing Liam's pain up close, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd taken the coward's way out. My mind drifted back to the night I'd left. I remembered sitting in my car outside the house, staring at the glow of the porch light. I told myself I wasn't abandoning Liam. I was protecting him from the inevitable fallout. But was that the truth, or just a convenient excuse? The weight of those old questions pressed down on me, but there was no undoing the past. The only thing I could do now was be here, ready to catch Liam if he fell. The hours ticked by in uneasy silence. I found myself pacing the apartment, glancing at the door every few minutes, half expecting Liam to barge back in with more questions, or worse, with no questions at all. When my phone buzzed on the counter, I snatched it up, my heart racing. But it wasn't Liam. It was Emma. I stared at the screen, her name glowing like a ghost from another life. I hadn't spoken to her since the day I left. Part of me wanted to let it ring, to toss the phone into a drawer and pretend I hadn't seen it. But another part of me, the part that still felt tethered to this mess, pressed accept. Hello? My voice came out rough, almost unrecognizable. Did you tell him? She asked, her tone sharp and accusatory. No greeting, no pleasantries. Classic Emma. Tell him what? I said, though I already knew exactly what she meant. Don't play dumb, she snapped. Did you tell him about the test? I told him the truth, I said evenly. He came here demanding answers, and I gave them to him. If you've got a problem with that, maybe you should have told him yourself. The silence on the other end was deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, but no less biting. You had no right. No right? I laughed bitterly. You lied to me for years, Emma. You let me believe he was mine, let me build a life around him, only to rip it all away. And now you're mad because I won't keep your secrets? You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling now. I was trying to protect him, protect all of us. By hiding the truth? I shot back. How's that working out for you? Her sharp inhale crackled through the line, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But then she said something that froze me in place. He's on his way home. If you care about him at all, you'll stay out of this. And just like that, the line went dead. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, her words echoing in my mind. Stay out of this? How could I, when I'd already opened the door to the truth? For better or worse, the storm was coming, and I knew I'd have to face it, no matter how much Emma wanted me to disappear again. Hours passed, and the unease in my chest only grew. I imagined Liam walking into their house, his face flushed with anger, the DNA papers crumpled in his fist. He wasn't the type to hold back. If Emma thought she could dodge his questions, she had another thing coming. But what would her answers be? What excuses would she spin this time? The thought made my stomach churn. I wasn't there to protect him, to make sure the truth came out clean. I was stuck in my cramped apartment, pacing the floor like a caged animal, waiting for the fallout. It was well past midnight when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Emma. It was Liam. I snatched up the phone and answered on the first ring. Liam? Yeah, he said, his voice strained. I'm outside. My heart skipped a beat. Outside? Here? Yeah. Can you open the door? Or do I have to break it down? I rushed to the door, yanking it open. Liam stood there, his face pale and drawn, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He brushed past me without waiting for an invitation, dropping his bag onto the floor with a thud. You were right, he said, his voice flat. I closed the door slowly, bracing myself. What happened? He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that didn't belong to a teenager. What happened? Oh, nothing much. I just found out my whole life is even more of a lie than I thought. I gestured for him to sit, but he waved me off, pacing the small space like a cornered animal. She admitted it, he said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. She knew the whole time. And the guy, the real dad? He's some married dude she worked with back then. They had this whole affair, and he bailed the second she told him she was pregnant. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process it all. Did she say why she kept it from you? Oh, she had plenty of excuses, he said, throwing his hands up. She didn't want to ruin my relationship with you. She thought she was doing what was best for everyone. But you know what it really was? She was scared. Scared that if the truth came out, everything would fall apart. And she was right. It did. He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his eyes blazing. She lied to me my whole life. And you? He pointed at me, his voice cracking. You just walked away. So now what? What am I supposed to do now? I wish I could tell you, I said honestly, meeting his gaze. But this is your decision, Liam. You have every right to be angry, to feel betrayed. You can take time to figure out how you want to deal with all this. And no matter what you choose, I'll be here. He stared at me, his shoulders rising and falling with each heavy breath. You say that now, but you left before. How do I know you won't just disappear again? The question hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't shy away from it. You're right to ask that, I said quietly. I can't change what I did before, but I can promise you this. I'm not going anywhere this time. Whatever you need, time, space, support, I'm here. He didn't say anything for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he dropped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I don't even know who I am anymore, he whispered, his voice muffled. I sat down next to him, keeping a respectful distance. You're Liam, I said softly. The kid who used to challenge me to see who could eat more pancakes on Saturday mornings. The one who lit up the room every time he talked about dinosaurs or space, or whatever had you excited that week. You're still that kid, Liam. And none of this changes that. His shoulders shook, and for a moment, I thought he was crying. But when he looked up, his eyes were dry, his jaw set with quiet determination. I want to meet him, he said. I frowned. Who? My real dad, he said, his voice steady. If he's out there, I want to meet him. I need to know who he is. My heart sank, but I nodded. Okay, I said, my voice calm despite the storm brewing inside me. If that's what you want, I'll help you find him. Liam didn't thank me. He just nodded, his face a mask of resolve. But I could see the cracks underneath, the pain he was trying so hard to hold back. And I knew this was only the beginning of a journey that neither of us was prepared for. The next morning, Liam woke up on the couch, looking as restless as he had when he fell asleep. His determination to find his biological father hadn't wavered overnight. If anything, he seemed even more resolved. So, where do we start? He asked, his tone matter-of-fact as he shoved a piece of toast into his mouth. I sipped my coffee, stalling for time. Are you sure about this, Liam? Once you open that door, you might not like what's on the other side. He glared at me. I already don't like what I've got now. What's the difference? I couldn't argue with that, so I pulled my laptop onto the table. Okay, what do you know about him? Name, where he worked, anything? Liam shrugged, leaning back in his chair. Mom said his name is Derek. He worked with her at some tech company back when I was born. That's all she told me before she started crying and telling me it didn't matter. Derek, I muttered, typing the name into the search bar along with a few keywords. That narrows it down to about 1 million people. Great, Liam muttered, folding his arms. Look, this isn't going to be easy, I said, scrolling through results. We're trying to track down a guy from over a decade ago based on one name and a vague job description. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Yeah, but this needle ruined my life, he snapped. I winced at the bitterness in his tone, but kept scrolling. After about an hour of fruitless searching, Liam let out a frustrated groan and stood up. This is pointless, he said, pacing the room. We're never going to find him. Maybe not today, I said, trying to keep him calm. But if he's out there, we'll figure it out. These things take time. Time, he muttered under his breath. Great. That's exactly what Mom doesn't have. The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been so focused on Liam and his search for answers that I'd almost forgotten the other looming crisis, Emma's illness. Liam, I said carefully, I know you're angry with her, and with me, but are you sure this is what you want to focus on right now? Your mom. She might not have much time left. Are you ready to leave this unresolved if something happens? He stopped pacing, his back to me. When he finally turned around, his face was a mix of anger and vulnerability. I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to know, even if it's just for me. I nodded, understanding the need even if it made my stomach churn. Okay, I said, then we'll keep looking. But if you change your mind, it's okay to hit pause on this. You don't have to carry it all at once. He didn't respond, just stared out the window, lost in thought. The day stretched on as we combed through search results, reached out to old contacts of Emma's, not that I had many, and pieced together fragments of information. Slowly, a picture began to form. A man named Derek who fit the description and had worked at Emma's old company years ago. By evening, we had a name, a possible address, and a heavy silence between us. This is it, Liam said, staring at the address on the screen. This is him. You don't know that for sure, I cautioned. It could be a dead end. Then I'll find out, he said firmly, standing up and grabbing his backpack. I shot to my feet. Whoa, wait. You're not just going to show up at his door, are you? Why not? He challenged, his eyes blazing. Because this isn't a movie, Liam, I said. You don't know what kind of guy he is or how he'll react. You've got to think this through. He hesitated, his hands tightening around the straps of his backpack. Then what am I supposed to do? Just sit here and wait? No, I said, my voice steady. We do this the right way. I'll go with you. But we plan it out first. For a moment, he looked like he might argue. But then he nodded, his shoulders sagging just a little. Fine, he muttered. Tomorrow. I nodded, though my chest felt tight with unease. Tomorrow, we'd go looking for answers. And I had a sinking feeling that the answers would only lead to more questions. The next day dawned heavy and gray, as if the weather had conspired to match the mood. Liam barely spoke over breakfast, his eyes fixed on the screen of his phone as he obsessively scrolled through directions to the address we'd found. Ready? I asked, though I wasn't sure I was. He nodded, shoving his phone into his pocket. Let's just do this. The drive to the address felt endless, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing mile. I wanted to say something, anything, to prepare him for what we might find. But every time I opened my mouth, the words felt inadequate. When we finally pulled up in front of a modest suburban house, Liam froze. He stared at it like it was a portal to another dimension. This is it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, I said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. But listen, Liam, whatever happens in there, whatever he says, it doesn't change who you are, okay? You're still you. He gave me a faint nod, though his jaw was clenched tight. Without another word, he stepped out of the car and started up the walkway. I followed a few steps behind, ready to step in if things got messy. Liam rang the doorbell, his hand trembling slightly. We waited in tense silence, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, the door opened, and a man in his late 40s stood there. He was tall and lean, with graying hair and a cautious expression. He looked at us, his brows furrowing. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but guarded. Liam took a deep breath, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "Are you Derek?" The man blinked, surprised. Yeah. Who's asking?" Liam hesitated, his composure cracking under the weight of the moment. I think you might be my dad." Derek's face went pale, his eyes widening as he glanced between Liam and me. "What?" he said, his voice barely audible. "You heard me," Liam said, his voice trembling now. "My mom's Emma. You worked with her years ago. She told me. You're my biological father." Derek's mouth opened and closed a few times before he finally spoke. This has to be a mistake." "It's not," Liam said, pulling out the crumpled DNA results from his pocket and shoving them toward Derek. "See for yourself." Derek didn't take the papers. He just stared at Liam, his expression shifting from confusion to something darker. "I don't know what she told you," he said slowly, "but I can't be your father." Liam's face twisted in frustration. "Why not? You worked with her, didn't you? You had an affair with her, didn't you?" Derek's jaw tightened, and he glanced around nervously, as if he was afraid someone might overhear. "Listen, kid, I don't know what your mom told you, but you've got the wrong guy. I haven't seen Emma in years, and I'm not." "You're lying," Liam shouted, his voice echoing down the quiet street. "You're lying because you don't want to deal with this. But guess what? You don't get to walk away from me like she did." Derek's expression hardened. "Lower your voice," he hissed. "I have a family, okay? A wife, kids." "So?" Liam snapped. "That didn't stop you before, did it?" Before Derek could respond, a woman appeared in the doorway behind him. She was in her late 40s, with kind eyes that quickly turned wary when she saw us. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between Derek and Liam. "Nothing," Derek said quickly, his voice tight. "Just a misunderstanding." Liam let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, sure. Misunderstanding. That's exactly what this is." The woman frowned, her gaze lingering on Liam. "Derek, who are these people?" "No one," he said, stepping back as if to close the door. But Liam wasn't having it. He stuck his foot in the doorframe, his eyes blazing with fury. "You don't get to brush me off like this," he said. "I deserve answers." "Liam," I said gently, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Let's go. This isn't the way." He shrugged me off, his focus locked on Derek. "You're a coward," he spat. "Just like her." Derek's wife looked shocked, her eyes darting between us. "Derek, what is he talking about?" "I don't know," Derek snapped, his face red with anger and fear. "I told you, kid. You've got the wrong guy." Liam stared at him, his shoulders rising and falling with each labored breath. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed back to the car. I followed, my heart heavy with the weight of what had just happened. As we drove away, Liam stared out the window, his face a mask of anger and pain. "Do you believe him?" he asked quietly after a long stretch of silence. I hesitated. "I don't know, Liam. But I do know one thing. If he's lying, the truth has a way of coming out." Liam didn't respond. He just kept staring out the window, his reflection in the glass looking more lost than ever. The ride back to my apartment was filled with the kind of silence that wasn't just empty. It was heavy, buzzing with unspoken emotions. Liam sat rigidly in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. I didn't push him to talk. After what had just happened, he needed space to sort through the chaos in his head. When we got back, he dropped his backpack in the corner and slumped onto the couch. He didn't look at me, just sat there, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "You okay?" I asked softly, breaking the silence. "No," he said bluntly, not lifting his head. I sat down across from him, giving him room to breathe. "Do you want to talk about it?" He shook his head. Then, after a pause, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Why would she tell me it was him if she wasn't sure?" "Maybe she thought it was true," I said carefully. Or maybe she didn't think you'd ever go looking for him. Liam's laugh was bitter and humorless. Yeah, well, she underestimated me, didn't she? I didn't respond. There wasn't much I could say that wouldn't sound like an empty platitude. Instead, I leaned back, letting him process in his own time. After a while, he looked up, his eyes red but dry. Do you think he was lying? I considered the question carefully. It's possible. He looked rattled, but I don't know him well enough to say for sure. Liam leaned back, his head resting against the couch cushion. If he's telling the truth, then what? There's someone else out there? Some other guy I'm supposed to track down and confront? Maybe, I said quietly. But you don't have to do this alone, Liam. We'll figure it out together. He stared at the ceiling, his expression unreadable. You know what the worst part is? What's that? I don't even care about him, he said, his voice hollow. I thought I did, but seeing him just made me realize he's nothing to me. Just some guy. The person I really want to scream at is her. I nodded slowly, understanding his frustration. Have you talked to her since yesterday? No, he said, shaking his head. What's the point? She'll just give me more excuses, more lies. I don't even know if I can believe anything she says anymore. Maybe it's not about believing her, I said. Maybe it's about getting closure. For you. Liam sat up, his eyes narrowing. Closure? What does that even mean? She lied to me for my entire life. She let me think you were the bad guy. And now, his voice cracked, and he clenched his fists. Now she wants me to just forgive her because she's sick? How am I supposed to do that? I leaned forward, my voice steady. You don't have to forgive her, Liam. Not right now. Maybe not ever. But holding on to all this anger, it's only going to hurt you. Not her. He stared at me, his eyes filled with a storm of emotions. So what? I just let it go? No, I said, but you let yourself feel it. Be angry. Be hurt. Cry if you need to. And then, when you're ready, decide what you want to do next. But don't let her mistakes control you. Liam looked away, his jaw tight. I don't know if I can do that. You can, I said. You're stronger than you think. He didn't respond, but I could see the gears turning in his mind. He was wrestling with his emotions, with the betrayal, with the unanswered questions. And for the first time, I saw a glimmer of something else in his eyes, determination. I need to talk to her, he said finally, his voice firm. Okay, I said, nodding. Do you want me to come with you? He shook his head. No, this is something I need to do on my own. Fair enough, I said, though my heart ached at the thought of him facing her alone. Just don't hold back. Say what you need to say. He stood, grabbing his backpack. I will, he said, his voice steady but quiet. And with that, he walked out the door, leaving me alone with the echoes of everything that had just happened. I could only hope that whatever came next, it would bring him closer to the peace he so desperately needed. It was late when Liam came back, his footsteps heavy as he pushed the door open. He didn't look at me, just dropped his backpack by the door and sat down at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. I stayed quiet, letting him take the lead. He sat there for a long time, breathing deeply, his shoulders tense. Finally, he spoke, his voice raw and tired. She admitted it, he said, his words barely more than a whisper. I didn't need to ask what he meant. And Liam let out a shaky sigh, his hands tightening into fists. She knew the whole time. About Derek, about everything. She didn't want to lose me. She said she thought it was better for everyone if I believed you were my dad. I winced. What did you say? I told her she had no right, he said, his voice cracking. I told her she didn't get to decide what was better for me, that she took away my choice. And then he trailed off, rubbing his eyes. She what? I prompted gently. She begged me to forgive her, he said, his voice trembling. She said she didn't want to leave this world with me hating her. My chest tightened at his words. What did you say? Liam looked up at me, his eyes red and glassy. I told her I don't know if I can. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He paused, swallowing hard. But I told her I'd try. For her. For me. I nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling over us. That's all you can do, Liam. Just try. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. It's not enough, though. It doesn't fix anything. She's still dying, and I don't know who I am anymore. You're figuring it out, I said, my voice steady. And that's all anyone can do. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You make it sound so simple. It's not, I admitted. But you're not alone in this. Whatever you decide, whether you forgive her, whether you ever want to try finding Derek again, I'll be here. I've got your back. Liam looked at me, his expression softening just a little. Thanks, he said quietly. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like we were finally on the same page. It wasn't perfect, nothing about this situation was, but it was a start. As the night wore on, Liam stayed at the table, and I sat with him, letting the silence fill the space between us. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt heavy or suffocating. It was something else, something quieter. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we might actually be okay.